Yeah. 1, 2, 3.
All right.
Close
Yeah,
enough.
mental help us line it up.
Yeah.
Okay, we're good.
The magic of
Brilliant.
audio wizardry. All right. I am here today with Phil Holden, who has been a very kind friend of the podcast this year in 2020. And we are going to talk about some early editions of Ulysses. I'm very excited to talk with you about this today, Phil, because I know next to nothing about this topic, but I think it's something our listeners would love to hear about. How are you today?
I'm very well. I'm talking to you from Athens, Greece, where I live. So, although for you it's early in the morning, I believe, for me, it's the early evening, and it's a warm day. I've had a good day, and I've been looking forward to talking about James Joyce with you
Yay.
all day. So,
Excellent. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Phil, so our
yeah,
listeners can get to know you?
yes, I'm well. My name's Phil Holden. I was brought up in London. I'm British, although I also took Irish nationality 2 years ago, prompted by Brexit. I was always entitled to this Irish nationality uh, on my father's side, but had never activated it. Uh, but now I'm also an Irish citizen, so I'm a citizen of the EU, which is good because I live in the EU here in Athens, in Greece, with my Greek wife, Agiri, and I've been in Athens for 25 years now, so quite a long time. I'm a headmaster of a large British school here, and I've been doing that work for quite a while now, 9 years as headmaster. Before that, I used to teach economics. Um, so that's me.
Awesome. How did you get into Joyce then, if you have an economics background?
Yeah, but earlier than that, I went to school in, as I said, in London. I was brought up in London, and it was a Catholic school. So I was brought up as a Catholic, and somewhere round about the age of 12 or 13, somehow I discovered a portrait of the artist as a young man. I'd always enjoyed reading, and at school, I recall getting this book and reading it. And I don't think I completely understood all of what Joyce was doing there, but I certainly enjoyed the book with a kind of Catholic angle on it. I certainly sympathized with some of his worries in that book expressed. So I that was my first encounter with Joyce. I certainly then read Dubliners and enjoyed Dubliners. I certainly remember looking at Ulysses and not understanding it, but it it kept coming back to me. I kept looking at it again and again, and eventually I realised I was hooked on Joyce and Ulysses. He's not the only writer I enjoy reading and rereading, but I'd certainly say his books, especially Ulysses, now is something that I feel very, very comfortable with. Maybe that's not the right word, but very familiar with, and I still derive enormous enjoyment from it.
Excellent. Do you feel like you took Buck Mulligan's advice to Hellenize yourself in moving to Greece?
Yeah, it wasn't Buck Mulligan who got me to Greece, but I certainly do recommend anybody borrowing 20 quid from their aunt and making their way down to Athens, which you can, I think, with some of the cheap airlines now, with Ryanair and so forth, you probably can do it for about 20 quid.
All right. And
I hope
oh,
people get that joke, Kelly, and don't just think I'm saying something daft.
well, they will think that I introduced the daft part because I said the thing about Buck Mulligan. So we are daft together.
Okay.
No, I think so. I think most of our listeners are pretty avid Joyce fans, or they're students who are just learning about Joyce. So if you didn't get the joke, listeners,
think it's on page 2, isn't
Yeah, read a little bit farther.
it?
Keep going. Get to page 3. That's where it really kicks in.
That's right. And then
Speaking
give up on page 4.
as per tradition. Um, I think it took me 2 or 3 times to actually get through the first chapter. Like Ulysses was a book I picked up and put down a few times before I actually read it. So,
Yeah, yeah.
um,
I completely understand that. I was really helped by an audio recording by the actor Jim Norton.
I was wondering if it was that one.
Yeah, and you know, and I've heard the RTE production as well. But you know, when you hear 2 versions of a song, and you just the first one is implanted in your brain more, and the second one is always another version. That's how I feel. I mean, the Jim Norton recording was just superb, and I really recommend it as entertainment in itself, because he really brings it alive, but also as a way in. I certainly learned a lot by following the book and listening to Jim Norton at the same time. I thoroughly recommend it.
All right, excellent. Real quick before we get into our Ulysses editions, what is your favorite scene or episode in Ulysses?
Yeah, it's so tough. I've really given this some thought. I I would go for Listragonians. I mean, there are several contenders. So Proteus is a contender, Cyclops is a contender. And, you know, I find always discovering things which, you know, bring enormous delight. I love the final 10% of Wandering Rocks. I think it's just fascinating how it's all put together. But if I had to pick one, it would be Listragonians.
All right. Thank you so much, Phil. So let's get into this. So you actually contacted me about wanting to talk about these editions of Ulysses. So where do you want to begin with this? Do we want to talk some about the publishing process or Joyce's relationship?
Sure. I think it's quite well known that he struggled to get all of his books published one by one. And even though he was a moderately successful writer, by the time he completed Ulysses, he had enormous trouble with Ulysses itself, as is well known, because it was, you know, it was seen to be obscene, and printers were reluctant to print it, and publishers were reluctant to touch it for fear of prosecution. So I find that story fascinating in itself. I think it's a well-known story, reasonably well-known story. I personally have an interest in the books as physical artifacts as well. I find that, I mean, I love books, and I think that the various editions of Ulysses that have emerged since 1922 are interesting artifacts themselves. Literally the way that they were put together, the way they were distributed, sometimes illegally, before the books were allowed to be distributed in English-speaking countries, and so forth. So there's a kind of crossover for me where I love books and first editions and so forth, but I also love Joyce. So together, it's you know, it's a perfect match for me. So I find the story of the publications of the various editions of Ulysses and the variations that exist very interesting, and I also love the books as objects themselves.
So you mentioned, and I think most listeners will be familiar with the fact that Ulysses was banned or not allowed in certain places. But it existed in the world. Were there like black market trade for obscene modernist novels?
Okay, so initially it was serialized in a kind of art modernist magazine called the Little Review. And this was, you know, 1919, 1920. It came across the attention of authorities this is in the US,
Mm-hmm.
It came across to the attention of the authorities because it was forbidden to send obscene material through the postal service. And because this was a kind of a niche magazine with a small distribution, but right across the country, they used the postal service. So this came to the attention of the authorities, and the publishers of this magazine were prosecuted. So even before Ulysses was completed, it was prosecuted. The Nausicaa episode was the one that finally tipped the balance, and that was it. It was just banned. The two publishers were prosecuted. And so it really did look like it wouldn't get produced. Now, it was produced in Europe because when he failed to find his publisher, living in France, in Paris at the time, of course, Joyce bemoaned in 1921 to the owner of his English language favorite bookshop in Paris, Shakespeare and Company, which was started and run by Sylvia Beach. He bemoaned to her, "No one's going to publish my book." And she said, "Well, would you like Shakespeare and Company to publish your book?" Not that they'd ever published a book before.
Oh, wow.
And he said yes. So he said yes. And Sylvia Beach, the first book she published was Ulysses. It was a great effort on her part. She used a printer in Dijon called Durantier. And she was told about him by her partner, who also ran a bookshop across the road from Sylvia Beach, and had used this printer before. And gradually he printed episode by episode as Joyce was finishing just ahead of him each episode. Gradually this was put together. Joyce was constantly adding to the proofs. He boosted the size of Ulysses by 1/3 just when he should have been correcting proofs. Sylvia Beach nearly bankrupted herself over this. Bear in mind that Durantier and his workers did not speak English. This was Sylvia Beach's first book to publish. It was a book that was already shown to be obscene. You know, there was so much against this working. So in the end, she was able to produce 1,000 copies in a pretty standard format, where a very small deluxe version was produced on better paper, numbered and signed by the author. Then a second slightly larger printing, and then finally a cheaper printing, which was still incredibly expensive. It was still, $300 in today's money.
Oh.
And so these 1,000 were eventually printed, published on the 2nd of February, 1922, Joyce's 40th birthday, of course. And it was a huge book, very fragile, not very well put together, liable to fall apart. So many people had them bound. Some of these got distributed to the UK. Some got distributed gradually to the US. So if you wanted a copy of Ulysses at this point, you had to get your hands on one of these 1,000 copies. This is 1922. There were no pirate copies at this point. So they were the only copies in existence. Some were trickling out to America, some via Canada, and most were being bought in Paris and in the UK.
Do any of those copies still exist?
Yeah, so there was an article in the Irish Times last year, which they investigated this, and they estimated, and it's only an estimate, that of the 1,000 copies, probably 800 are still in existence. Probably 200 have been lost, damaged, have gone. Of the 800, they estimate that half of those 800, so 400, are now in collections owned by museums, public galleries, university collections, and so forth. And probably about 400 are in private ownership. Those first 100 are extremely valuable, clearly.
Yeah, definitely seem like they would be sought after collector's items for the
Yeah.
true James Joyce fan. That
I have a copy
those
here, Kelly.
oh
So
of
this
that
is,
early edition.
yeah.
Oh.
So this is one of those. It's been rebound.
Mhm.
It's a pretty hefty tome,
Mhm.
and I'm glad it's been rebound in the sense that it certainly protects the book.
Mhm.
This is copy 927, and I've probably had this for about 10 years now.
Mhm.
Um, so it's lovely to flick through. There are
Mhm.
some errors in the printing that don't exist in any other printing, which
Mhm.
makes it very nice.
Is
One
there
thing, Mike,
is there one you can think of that is an
yeah.
interesting
So
example of
so
that?
yeah. Well, there is a very nice example of this on page 31, line 10. It's from the Nestor episode, and Mr. Deasy is lecturing Stephen about how he should save his money, and Stephen's running through his mind, all the people he owes money to. It's a very nice scene, and that the word board, meaning accommodation,
Mhm.
BOARD, is in that little scene. It's
Mhm.
misspelt in this book, but it's only misspelt in some of the first printings,
Mhm.
because 150 of the first printings are on larger paper, and as they had printed the others and they reset ready to print on the larger paper, that word got corrected. So, there's just an example of an error in the printing, not just exclusive to the first printing, but exclusive to just some of the first printings.
Mhm.
Just
Cool.
It is cool. It's a bit nerdy. It's a
It's yeah.
bit
Oh,
Anaraki, but
yes.
it's pretty cool.
Those are the Blooms and Barnacle people, I think.
Me
So
too.
someone recently objected to the idea of Bloomsday being described as nerdy, and I was quite surprised by that personally. But that's fine.
Well, if it is
Mhm.
nerdy, I'm not ashamed.
Oh no, I've
I embrace it.
took the word right out of my mouth. Um, so is I guess then if they changed errors that were in that first edition, I can't remember. I'm terrible at quoting things, but I'm trying to remember the line from the Scylla and Charybdis episode, something about a genius makes no mistakes. It's all out
The
of his
portal
own.
of discovery.
Yes, there you go.
Yeah, yeah,
The,
and yeah.
the
So
publisher
maybe,
felt
maybe.
otherwise.
Well, yeah. But they certainly corrected them later and
Mhm,
introduced other errors,
mhm.
and
Oh,
that's
right.
just one of the endless arguments about
Mhm. And they
Ulysses. Is
corrected things that were volitional as well, didn't they?
yes, and one of the problems has been that there's no definitive manuscript
Mhm,
from Joyce to which all reference could be made, because he worked in various stages. He corrected himself backwards and forwards. He rewrote his entire manuscript to sell to a patron, John Quinn, and yet that very manuscript is not what was given to the printers, and what was given to the printers has been lost. So it's not known exactly what strange spellings and constructions of words were Joyce's work as he gave them to the printer, or were the printer's errors in that very first case. So anyway, Shakespeare and Company produced another edition a few months later in October of 22, exclusively. It was actually not Shakespeare and Company. It was actually printed through Shakespeare and Company using their anti-air again, but purely for the English market. And this was published for the Egoist Press. Harriet Weaver, who funded so much of Joyce's life, wanted to bring this out. She couldn't find a printer in the UK who was willing to take the risk, so they used their NTA again. This was 2,000 copies, which were exclusively to be shipped to the UK. Many got through, but 500 were discovered in a ship and destroyed. So this edition is, moderately rare, very, very fragile, and but it's out there. It's not so difficult to find a copy, and it certainly wouldn't set anyone back nearly as much as the first printing.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a nice copy. It's very similar to the first printing. My first printing doesn't have the original iconic blue wrappers, but this copy of the second printing here does. So this is, it's got that lovely white on blue that Joyce was so
It's meant to
determined to achieve.
It's meant to be like a Greek blue, isn't it?
Yeah. So I should be able to judge for you whether that is the case, but it's not. Well, my one, this must have faded because there's nothing as blue as the lovely blue sky most days in Greece.
Of course. I'm thinking of. I think. Go for it.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that it went on and on. These printings out of Durantier. Another printing was done for England. They all got destroyed except one or two copies, the third printing. But then Shakespeare and Company just started to produce more and more as they found ways to get these distributed. In the end, there were a total of 11 printings through Durantier. Most of those were Shakespeare and Company, coming out of Dijon and Paris, and and they lasted until 1930. The book was definitely still illegal in America and in the UK, but with 28,000 copies out there, it was possible to find copies if you went looking for it.
if you knew the right people.
Yeah, and booksellers who were willing to sell it from under the counter, I guess. One small variation, which is quite interesting, is the fourth, the fifth, and the sixth printings. The iconic colours of white writing on blue were reversed. So I don't know if you think this looks nicer, but this is the fourth printing and blue on white. Really, really cheap paper.
Oh, wow.
Very, very brown. Do you know what I mean? Very kind of crackly and crinkly. I wouldn't want to open this book too much because I fear it would just disintegrate.
Right.
In my hands.
Is there any danger in touching the pages of these almost 100-year-old books without gloves or anything like that? Because I notice
Probably.
you're okay.
I am.
Yeah.
Look, I'm not. My own feeling on it is that whilst I look after the books, I'm certainly going to take them out and look at them. I'm not, these are for pleasure for me, and I care about them, but I'm careful with them. But yeah, I am going to touch them, and I will carefully turn the pages, of course. What's the point otherwise?
Yeah. Okay.
Isn't that, doesn't that make sense? I think
it does.
I think
yeah.
we have to look at these books.
One of my high school jobs was working in a local museum, and so it was very much like anything old you touch with gloves. So I think there's still part of me that's like, but it's old.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to put your fingers on it. But I have heard different ideas too about handing archival items, I guess. So I'm sure,
and maybe I shouldn't be doing that, but
they're yours.
I want to enjoy. I want to enjoy the books. Yeah.
Yeah, and that certainly has to be something to consider as well. Collecting rare books. I've never collected rare books, but to me, an object is always has an inherent use to it.
Yes.
And if you can't use it for that purpose, then
absolutely.
I don't want to say what's the point, but okay, thank you for saying it for me.
Say it. Yeah, exactly. It's like we hear the anecdotal stories of art collectors locking away the art. I defeats the purpose for me. So they're just books, and they're important, but they are just books, and they're meant to be looked at. That's
Yeah.
good.
I think I'm thinking of
One
like
thing-
of,
yeah.
of wine collectors who get these very old rare bottles of wine to just display. It's vinegar on the inside, but look, it's from this famous vintage.
Well, if it is vinegar on the inside, they may as well not drink it, I guess. But
Fair enough.
I guess the difference there is that when you drink the wine, I mean, it's gone. When I look at the book, it's not gone, as long as I'm careful. So, yeah, these are nearly 100 years old, but they are they're in pretty good shape.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I will say for anyone, I guess no one's just jumping into this because it's a podcast and not a radio show. But if you want to see Phil's books, he's holding them up to his camera. You can see this all on YouTube if you're listening to the audio only version. So a little reminder dropped in there.
Kelly, you said earlier about were there any kind of pirate copies or illegal, printings. I mean, illegal in the sense of without the permission of Joyce. And there was a copy produced in 1929 in America. So there was a strange man called Samuel Roth who was a lover of modernist literature. He'd corresponded with Ezra Pound and with other writers. He wrote to Joyce as well, asking could he publish Joyce's work. He'd seen the serialization in the little review of Ulysses episode by episode, and he understood how important Ulysses was. So he really loved this literature, but his love overstepped the mark because he chose to pirate the book. He started pirating it in a magazine and was stopped with injunctions there. So he just produced a whole book. He took a copy of the Shakespeare and Company edition from 1927 and used it to produce his own copy of Ulysses, which he had printed in, I think it was 2000, 3000, and distributed. And of course, Joyce was getting none of this money, and it was all potential sales. Were they able to produce it legally in the USA? So it was very important to Joyce and to Shakespeare and Company that they were that Roth was prevented from doing this. Funnily enough, Roth used much better paper than Sylvia Beach, so it's a much higher quality production. This is a copy of that pirated copy, which I've had rebound, but I can assure you that I'm holding it now, this book, in case people are only listening. The paper is smoother, it's thicker, it's heavier. There's no, it's lasted so much better.
It doesn't have the ragged edges like the previous one that you showed.
Well, no, it doesn't. Some of the books will have those ragged edges. Some won't, because very often in the rebinding process, the edges are trimmed.
Oh, I see.
The top edge will always be trimmed because when sitting on a bookshelf, you don't want dust to filter into the in between the pages.
Okay.
So it's very, very common to have the top edge trimmed, but other edges may well be trimmed as well in the rebinding process. This one has been, but it's just really good paper. He used excellent paper. There are a number of errors through the book.
Are
So
there
it's not
errors that are unique to his pirate edition?
Yeah, and I don't understand why he made these errors, but there are errors. So in the listing of other books written by Joyce, which appears in all those Shakespeare and Company productions, they are listed under the publisher Jonathan Cape, who by then had acquired the rights to Joyce's earlier books. Well, Roth's pirate edition misspells the word Jonathan in Jonathan Cape. I just don't understand how he could make such a basic error. In other parts of the book, some lines are printed upside down accidentally. For some reason, that error was made. So it's not. No one could really confuse this as an official copy of the book, but it was trying to masquerade as a Shakespeare and Company production.
Interesting. All right.
So it was very important for Joyce to fight that obscenity case and have his book legalized and find a legal publisher in the US and the UK, the biggest markets for him, so that he could benefit from the publication of the book. I mean in a purely commercial sense. You know, he was always needing money, and he didn't want someone like Samuel Roth to profit from his his work, his great work. So it was looming. This court case was clearly looming. There were a few other productions before it finally went to court in 1934. Just a couple of interesting productions. A quite small copy of Ulysses was produced. So in 1932, the Odyssey Press, which was working in mainland Europe, produced a pocket-sized book of Ulysses in 2 volumes, which are very neat and very well produced, and simultaneously also produced a hardback, which was the first hardback Ulysses officially produced. The hardback is really small. I'm holding it comfortably in my hand. It's the kind of book that is a standard size of a paperback. It's incredibly thin. It's very thin paper is used.
I was going to say, is it like Bible paper where it's really thin and tiny words?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, the words don't look that small, but the paper, which that's a good description, isn't it? Bible paper. You know, I think also it's sometimes called India paper for some reason.
Yeah, I don't know what the technical term is. It's just
I don't know if that's the technical term or whether it's just a kind of an informal name, but I've heard India paper. It's not bad quality at all. It's good, but it's incredibly light and thin. So there really are the usual number of pages. So I'm looking. Well, there's more pages in fact. So it goes up to this printing 792, but it's so thin. So that's a really nice little production.
You take it to the beach with you.
Absolutely.
Your summer beach. Ulysses is definitely a beach read.
Oh yeah, it's just like reading, isn't it? It's on those airport carousels, and that's right. Yeah. So I'd like to tell you about a couple of other productions that came out just before the legalization. There was the first translation of Ulysses, and that was into German. And that is not a book you could slip into your pocket. So I'm struggling to lift now the 3 volumes that make up Ulysses. It actually came out in 3 volumes in German. I don't know German. Is German a particularly kind of expanding language?
I was going to ask. I was going to say, my stupid question is that German words are famously very long.
They can be.
And I was like, is it longer because the German words are longer? I don't know if that's.
Well, it could be that, couldn't it?
I don't know. I bet there's a lot of footnotes and annotations on those that are not in the English. That would be my serious guess. My joke.
It's also nice big print.
Okay.
There's the German.
And there's a pretty thick margin around that text as well. So.
Yeah. So it's one of those books which look big, but when you're reading it, you find you can get through 50 pages quite quickly. You know those books. So it must be quite satisfying to read it. Very nice production in 1927.
It's interesting that German was its first translation. I thought for sure it would have been French or maybe Italian. Did not know that.
The French was 2 years behind. It was 1929. And Joyce had a hand in that. He didn't have a hand in the German translation. He was critical of the German translation, although it did sell out, and he was happy about that. But he had quite a part to play in the French translation. So the French translation was translated by 2 translators, but also Joyce supervised the translation along with his good friend. What was his name? Valerie Larbeau. And so quite a team working on the French translation, which came out. And the nice thing is, it was produced by the bookshop over the road, literally over the road from Shakespeare and Company. Shakespeare and Company, Sylvia Beach, were at number 12, Rue de l'Odéon. At number 7 on the same road was a French bookshop run by Sylvia Beach's partner, Ariane Monnier. Her bookshop was called La Maison des Amis des Livres, and they produced the first French Ulysses. It's huge. This is it. It's massive. It's super thick, and a really hefty tome, really bigger than any production up to that point in a single volume.
Yeah, it's huge.
Really massive tome. So very nice production. Again, I don't know if the French expands or not, but Joyce certainly was involved with the translation, so it must be quite a true translation.
Yeah, we've done episodes of podcasts about translation before, and translation into Japanese, which is very, very different from English.
Yeah.
But anyone who can translate these books into a foreign language is a superhuman.
The first Japanese translation of Ulysses was 1932. So it was out in Japan in Japanese before it was legalized in English-speaking countries.
Huh. And of course, Ireland never banned it outright. They just never let it in, right?
Yeah.
Not till the 60s.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think in the end, I think it was banned, but I'm not sure. I know that the first production of Ulysses in Ireland, printed in Ireland, did not come out until 1997.
Oh my God, I didn't realize it was that late.
Yeah. Look, along with everything I'm saying, Kelly, I stand to be corrected on all of this. I don't claim to, but I'm pretty certain that was 1997.
That's very late. Well, they didn't let his remains come back in the 40s, much less his books. So.
Yeah. So when was the first time you could legally buy a copy of Ulysses in your home country?
1933.
Very good. The court case was 33, and the first American edition came out in 34.
Oh, so close.
Right at the start of 34.
And that's the graphic design on that cover, I think is it's very much of that era. Like it looks like it's from the 30s, and it's just I love the look of it.
Yeah, it really is a beautiful cover. And what would you say what is that? Is it I mean, I don't know, is that Art Nouveau? Is that what is that style?
Not Art Nouveau, and Art Deco I think is
Art Deco is what I meant.
Yeah.
It really is of that time, isn't it? So it's, and I like the way it's red and white and black. You know, they're not trying to just keep going with this blue.
The Greek blue. Do you know if there's any reason beyond just aesthetics to use red there?
No, I don't know.
Okay.
Is there?
No, I was asking you. I have no idea.
I don't know.
Just occurred to me.
I also I know that the designer of the cover has his name in the very first printings in tiny letters down the outside of which his name was Reichel, and it's very, very small letters. That was removed quite quickly. So the first printings of the dust jacket will have that. And also there was another iconic point to the first American edition, was the enormous U on the title page, with the letter U, even though it's lowercase, is taking up the entire page. It must be, I don't know, 500 point or something font. And then also the letter S at the start of stately.
So that's how my edition looks. That was not done but prior to that 1934 edition.
No, that's
Okay.
the first time. So again, I'm not quite sure. Random House were the publishers in America. It was a very new publishing house. I mean, of course, now it's an enormous. Random House was sold in 1965, and gobbled up by, I can't remember who, but at the time of 34 and the time it came out, it was a new, daring publisher that was trying to make a splash with taking a big risk with Ulysses. They printed just over 10,000 of these in the first edition, and it sold out, and they just kept on producing them. Once it was legalized, once Judge Woolsey said it's not obscene, it's art. Thank goodness for him. So the whole court case surrounding the question of obscenity, I think would make a fantastic movie.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I would agree. And it's...
Who would play Joyce, do you think?
Oh, that I don't know. I have to think about that. I take that question very seriously.
Ewan McGregor played Joyce in that movie.
No.
No.
No. I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but he's too handsome.
Yeah.
Joyce seems like a very
sure they could rough him up
angular face. Yeah. So
and
someone
by then,
who already
of course,
kind of looks like
he's
that.
already a wreck. He's half blind. He's shuffling around. His fancy cane is actually sort of becoming a blind man's cane by then. He's really in decline by the early 30s. So yeah, I'm not sure who would play it.
No.
It's a great story, and it'd be a great movie.
Yes. All right, Hollywood, I know you're listening. Get on it. Yeah.
Okay, so then of course it was only natural that it should be legalized back in the UK. And
so the US
British...
I was gonna say the US beat the UK, but the US was ahead of the UK on printing Ulysses.
Yeah, it went to court. I mean, they triggered the guys at Random House triggered. They provoked the court case. They actually arranged to get court bringing a copy of Ulysses into the US. They contemplated printing it 1,000 copies and then fighting the case, but it was cheaper to get court bringing one copy in. They tipped off the customs guys. There is someone bringing an illegal item in on this boat from the US. From into the US. The custom guys waved it through at the package. They looked at it, they opened it up, they said, "Oh, everyone's bringing this in." and they actually said, "No, we want you to seize this. This is not allowed. We want you to seize it." And they did seize it, and then they were able to provoke the case, and it was fought. If anybody wants to read the story of this and the wider story of Ulysses, there is a superb book by Kevin Birmingham. The Most Dangerous Book, and the chapters that build up to the story surrounding Random House's decision to provoke the court case and the fighting of the court case. It's just a fascinating story, and for that reason, yes, it was provoked in the US first, and found to be not obscene, and so first published in the US 34.
All right, excellent.
And then two years later, the UK copied the US and produced, a lavish limited edition, 1,000 copies, a huge book, really lovely, gorgeous.
Oh, I like that one too. I've seen that before.
Yeah,
with the
Eric Gill's design. I don't have the dust jacket for it, unfortunately.
Do you know why the bow is on the cover?
Well, is it more than just the Greek, the symbol of Homeric art? Is it more than that? Is it is it Ulysses? Odysseus is Ulysses in Greek is Odysseus.
Mhm.
Odysseus. Is it Odysseus's bow? Is it that? Is it just a symbol of Greek art?
I don't
Is it
know.
more?
I'm curious
I
to
don't
hear
know.
what
I
you
can
think.
only.
All right.
It must be that. It must
Yeah.
be that.
Mhm.
Maybe someone can tell us. I don't know, but I've always assumed it's just symbolic of
Mhm.
the Greek connection
Yep, and
to
we do.
Odysseus, to Ulysses.
We always hold space for wild speculation on our show, so
Yeah.
feel free. Yeah,
It is beautiful though.
it is
And that
beautiful.
was on,
Yeah.
and that was on every edition from then on. The Bodley Head, the British publisher, the Bodley Head, who produced Ulysses from 1936 to 1970. They consistently used that design, even though the books got smaller and smaller. I've got some Bodley Head books here. So
Are those all Ulysses?
yeah, they're all just different editions. So this is, I think, 1964. It's much cheaper. There's the bow. That bow again. So yeah, and from that point on, it was just every few years another production. 1960 was an important year when they corrected a lot of the text.
Right. Yeah.
So the 1960 edition, which was then reprinted through the 60s and 70s, is seen as a very clean and referenceable production.
I think that is the text that is in my single copy of Ulysses that I own.
Right. Probably is. It will certainly say so. On the reverse of the title page, where it will always give details about the, about the production of that particular edition, you will always find there. It will say this is the 1960 text.
Yeah, I think it says it on the cover, and I think it's a 1990 edition, the one that I have.
Right.
And I think it's meant to be as a counterpoint to the 1984 edition.
Kelly, you know that a very different edition was produced, don't you? You have in the 1980s.
Yes, 1984, the year of my birth, Kelly Bryan, year zero. There was I'm not sure to say his name. I've been saying Walter Gabler, but I think I've heard people say Gabler or other ways. But that he really changed the text pretty substantially in some ways. I know a lot of it was like spelling errors and things like that, but then there was also the big change was in Scylla and Charybdis, where they re-added like a substantial little bit of text there, a small paragraph. So
yeah, it was so as far as I understand, in 1984, working out of Munich, he produced this claim of 5,000 textual corrections, having used Joyce's manuscripts, and then 2 years later, in '86, this became the adopted text, the corrected text, it was known as. And that's when all the big publishers, Penguin in the UK, I don't know in the US who it would be, that's what they started using. And there were some really major differences. And later in the 80s, I think it was 1989, a severe criticism of what Gabler had done was produced by John Kidd, who took apart what Gabler had done, absolutely tore it to pieces, and said, no, this is there's no way you can claim that there was a correct text. It's a variation at the best, but there are actual errors as well. And, he pointed out things that had happened on the 16th of June in 1904, where Joyce had used particular names of real people, where Gabler had corrected their names, changed their names to names that were just incorrect. These are describing real people in the newspaper in 1904, in 16th of June 1904, the day Ulysses was set, of course. So blatant errors, and it's my understanding that there's a discrediting now of that corrected text. And if you go and buy Ulysses now in a bookshop, you'll find that they've probably reverted to the 1960 printing, but you can also now buy editions that say the original 1922 text restored.
Yeah.
So I don't see that Gabler text is still the one being used. I don't think it is at all. I don't see that.
I see it cited in a lot of scholarly papers, even recent ones. I've always seen it as kind of a personal preference. Like the bulk of Ulysses is still Ulysses, but there are certain passages that he added that would change the interpretation of themes in the novel. So
someone told me that I should read John Kidd, who wrote the attack on what Gabler had done. He wrote an important article in a New York, one of the book magazines in the US, and he wrote a book about this, the scandal of Ulysses, and it's just very, very convincing. I mean,
yes,
it's shocking. So I definitely know where I stand on that for my personal preferences.
Is the pre-Gabler are you coming down on the side of pre-Gabler, PG? Yeah. Okay.
It's but I just love that very, very first printing for what it was and for what it had taken to get it printed. I just love it with all its mistakes and errors. I just love it.
Is there any text to Ulysses then that is totally free from error, unsullied by typographical errors or spelling mistakes? Or
I don't think there is, Kelly, because there's different levels of error. There's things that aren't errors, but they are the wrong spelling in the English language that Joyce would have used.
But non-volitional ones. Non-volitional errors.
Well, there may be, but there's nothing to correct it from. There's no point where you can say that was, with some oddities in the book, how do we know whether that's what he wanted or didn't want? Because we don't have that single reference manuscript where he said, "That's my Ulysses, go and print it." It never happened like that. And so there is no single ancestor to all of these editions. There's no point of reference there. There are these variations of which ones do we. So there's this famous manuscript, I mentioned it earlier, that he sold to John Quinn because he promised to sell him the manuscript. He just wrote it out, but he didn't write it out the same as what he'd given to the printers. Well, which one do we? I mean, it's in his hand. He wrote it. "Nother dying, come home, father." The telegram that Stephen receives in Proteus. He remembers receiving this telegram. Well, is it "nother dying" or "mother dying"? It's an important line in the book, and it doesn't spoil us enjoying. It doesn't stop us enjoying Ulysses, whichever it is. But which one did Joyce mean? In the manuscript he wrote for Quinn, he writes "nother" quite clearly, but in the 1922 edition, and every edition through to 1984, and Joyce was looking over these, he wrote "mother." With "mother" was printed. In the French edition, which he oversaw the translation, it's "mother."
It says "mother." It doesn't say
exactly.
or French.
It doesn't say "une autre," another.
Yeah.
It says "mother." So but the manuscript said another. So, which is the right one? I don't know, but that's not the reason I don't like the Gabler edition. I don't like the Gabler edition for the absolute errors that are made when when Gabler corrects, but makes a mess of names of real people who definitely Joyce was referring to. There's no excuse for that. So that, for me, discredits the Gabler text.
Do you think that Joyce would enjoy knowing that people are still bickering 100 years later about?
Yeah, of course. What did he say? He said, didn't he? I put in so many little puzzles, and I can't remember the quote. He said something like,
"Scholars will be arguing for the next 1,000 years."
Yeah. He knew what he was doing. But isn't it amazing the level of I mean, you make this come alive so well in the podcast.
Thank you.
The care that he took in the construction of just something that Stephen spends one line thinking about walking down the beach in Proteus, for example. He just, it could be anything, but no, there's so much behind it. It's so carefully put together. I mean, it is remarkable.
Yeah, we made a creative decision at the outset of Blooms and Barnacles to assume that everything in Ulysses means something, because a man like James Joyce doesn't write a book like Ulysses without doing that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, he wasn't just churning the words out.
Yeah.
He really constructed it, and it's quite hard to convey that to some people when you're talking to them about Ulysses and they've not read it or they don't quite know. It's so when someone says I had struggled to read it, well, good that you struggled, because not every book that you pick up has to be a page turner. Those books are great as well, for entertainment. But what about struggling at something and discovering and unfolding and unpicking the layers? What a pleasure that is as well. So, I think that's the gift of Ulysses. You can always discover more and admire the writing and the humor and so forth. But there's so much in there.
And I think too, Joyce liked the idea of seeding these little obscure references in, and the idea then of his readers going out and trying to figure them out and learning something in the process. And I think that's something he did from a young age. And I think many self-identified nerds can relate to that impulse, because I know that's definitely something I have done in my life. And I'm trying to think, there was this, I'm not sure how to, a short essay he wrote called The Day of the Rabblement, where he opened it with the line, like, said the Nolan, which referred to Giordano Bruno of Nola, but no one knew who he was talking about.
Because that's it. They really didn't know at first. He wrote that when he was 18, 19 years old.
And
such confidence,
he
such
just
arrogance.
Did that for the rest of his life, I think.
Yeah, I've got a copy of that here actually. So this is.
Is that his critical writings, or is that specifically Day of the Rabblement?
This is the
oh my god!
So this is a kind of a protective binding, but so this is this is it. I mean, it's 8 pages, and most of it is Skeffington's essay. So it's the two of them. They each wrote an essay.
Right.
That the university newspaper would not accept.
Right.
So that,
yeah.
In their arrogance, they went out and said, "Well, we're going to get it printed, and we're going to distribute it." And Skeffington's essay reads, naturally, it's thoughtful. Joyce starts with that line, and he if you want, will people carry on reading after that, or will they just say, "I don't understand what he's saying"? He doesn't care. He knows how he wants to say it. He's got such confidence arrogance, but
Yeah,
it's
my understanding was
powerful.
it became like kind of a joke around the University
Yeah.
College Dublin campus, like the Nolan. Here comes the Nolan now, kind of thing.
You know,
I
in Dublin, they
mhm,
opened recently the Museum of Literature Ireland,
mhm,
and they've which the acronym is MOLI,
mhm.
MOLI, and I've not been. Really
I
looking
have
forward to
not been
going at
either.
some point. But I know that first of all they have copy number 1 of Ulysses
Hmm.
on display from the 1922 printing, which was Harriet Weaver's copy, Joyce dedicated to her. But they also have recently they reproduced the Day of the Rabblement in a very nice edition,
Oh, wonderful.
in the same dimensions as that
Hmm.
first printing, and it's a nice thing to get hold of.
Hmm. Excellent. I want to say, as this conversation has progressed, you just keep pulling more and more exciting things from beneath the
Yeah,
screen, and I am on the
yeah,
edge of my seat, waiting to see what you're
yeah.
you're going to pull out and show me
Okay.
next. Hmm.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I really am delighted that I was able
Hmm.
to find the very first thing he wrote.
Hmm.
Um, so apparently, his father printed a poem that he wrote when he was 9. No
Hmm.
copies exist.
I was
So
like,
aside,
I was gonna say, do you have the
and here,
poem?
no, I don't.
I was gonna
But
lose my mind.
but there is.
Hmm.
I mean that's there are lines from it reproduced from the
Hmm.
memory of Stanislaus, his brother,
Hmm.
in his account of his brother's life, but no copy exists of that poem. But when he was 18, he wrote a review of Henrik Ibsen's play When We Dead Awaken, and this was published in a very strange uh, magazine called the Fortnightly Review, which was a strange mixture of articles. He was only 18. It was such a good review that Ibsen himself remarked, what a great review, and wrote to Joyce
Hmm.
to say that he'd
Oh,
enjoyed that. And amazing that
yeah.
even Ibsen at a ripe old age saw something in the review
Hmm.
that Joyce wrote. So I some years ago I was able to track down a copy of that review. It's not the whole magazine; it had been pulled from the magazine, but so it's very nice. I have this copy of Ibsen's. I've never seen Ibsen's play, but
Oh.
Joyce's review of the play is a very interesting read. I mean, it's
Hmm.
it's a cut above what you would imagine any clever 18-year-old would be writing
Hmm.
as a drama review in their school.
Hmm.
He was quite a writer.
He certainly was. I think we could agree on that.
Yeah. What
Hmm.
I'm not a great fan of his poetry. I
Hmm.
find the poetry. Don't you find? I don't know if other people think this, but the
Hmm.
poetry is a little kind of.
I have to admit, I'm not that familiar with his poetry. I'm much more familiar with his novels, but
Yeah.
I am not a James Joyce completist. I've not read everything
Right.
that he's written. So,
Well, the
um,
poetry just to me it seems somewhat. It's a bit too kind of.
mhm.
What's the word I'm looking for? A bit lovey, and a bit sort of. It's almost to me it's rather
Mhm.
Victorian almost,
Mm.
but so it doesn't grab me. It's for me it's quite hard to reconcile that the person that wrote Ulysses would write lyrical poetry like that.
Yeah. I
But,
think what I have always liked about Ulysses, because people will ask me why Ulysses, why you're so into Ulysses, and usually what I tell them, my fun answer is that, oh well, because it was banned as obscene, and then I read it and it was actually obscene. Um,
yeah,
um,
not like those books that were like risque 100 years ago because they had 2 swear words in or something.
right. Or like you
It,
read.
it really is.
Mhm.
It really is quite obscene, isn't it?
Yeah, and I love that about it. And I I think that to me that sense of humor and that kind of wryness or wittiness has been one of his greatest strengths. That seeing the world that way is really what has made me like Joyce and Ulysses, is that he has this sort of critical, even suspicious eye of things. Well, at the same time, there's a sentimental core underneath. But I think leaning too much into that sentimentality will cause me to lose interest.
Don't you find also that one of the great things is it makes me realize that people 100 years ago in a city were just like us.
Yeah.
Okay, so the world is different, but too often when we see an old movie or you read an old novel, the people somehow seem unlike us, but the way he captures the way they think and the way they talk and the banality of their everyday life is, to me, it's extraordinary, because it shows how similar their lives were to our lives.
Yeah, it feels very universal.
They're just ordinary people, aren't they?
And I think that is shown in the fact that, it's so well regarded so long after that people read it, and it's not just like we're reading it for, academic edification. Certainly we do, but it's people read it because they like the book. They like it just genuinely as a book, as a story to read, that also has like crazy things in it that you can never understand.
Yeah, it does.
It's so difficult and so obtuse that you wouldn't think 100 years on it would be something that has, a dedicated fandom and like amateur book clubs that just sit around and read it because they like the prose of it,
Yeah, I like the idea that you don't understand everything going on. I mean, why do we have to understand everything going on? If I go down the street, I don't understand everything going on. I don't know why that person is going there. I don't know why that person is shouting. I'll overhear someone talking on the phone and I don't know what it's about. Why do we have to understand everything in a snapshot of a day and these characters? It's fine that we don't understand everything. What I like to think sometimes is, there's that one ordinary Thursday in Dublin in 1904, and we were just following those two characters. Okay, and Molly a little bit. And I can imagine there's another Ulysses book, which is the 15th of June, 1904, and another one, and another one. There could be a Ulysses written for every day, not just the 16th of June, but for every single day and for every single city. And, there could be a book like that describing in a normal way any day and so this is just, we happen to have this one. It happens to describe 16th of June 1904, and it happens to be Dublin, but you could do that with any day and with any city, and you'd get the complexity and the intertwining of ordinary people's lives. So it's a lovely little tiny slice of the complexity of how we live our lives. It's magic.
Yeah, and I think too, when I finished Ulysses for the first time, I was happy sad because I wasn't ready to stop spending time with those characters yet. And so I kind of have just kept continuously reading it since 2017. And definitely the podcast exists in part to give me a reason to keep returning to it over and over and over.
But what happened the next day? What happened on the 17th of June?
Hangover. Terrible hangover.
Terrible hangover for Stephen. And
Molly's cooking the kidneys now because Bloom can't get out of bed.
Yeah.
That's what happened.
That's right. Yeah. So yeah, that's right. Someone should write that one.
Ooh, that man, that's when we started this show too, like there's definitely a feeling of like, I don't want people to think I'm taking over from Frank Delaney, because I could never do that. But the presumptuousness of trying to take over from Joyce is that is a Joycean ego is needed for writing
Maybe one
Ulysses.
day.
Ulysses 2, June
Ulysses
17th.
2. Yeah. That's right. But yeah, it would be nice to know what happened to them. I guess.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
have a lot of people on Facebook tell me that Stephen went on to write Ulysses.
Oh, I'll get my head around that one. Right. Right. Well, maybe. Well, I mean, of course, is Joyce more Stephen or more Leopold Bloom? Do you think
He's both. He's both of
he
them.
is both? But do you
Yeah.
think he's more? I mean,
I think when he was 22, he was more Stephen, and when he was 38, he was more Bloom.
Bloom to me feels much older than 38.
Yes, he does not feel
I
2
say
years
that
older
as a
than me.
53-year-old.
I say that as a 36-year-old.
Right. He definitely feels older, and maybe I don't know. Maybe that's just people got older quicker somehow.
Yeah, that's kind of
back then.
Because I think like people who were like when my parents were in their mid-30s, they seemed older than I feel now. Of course, I'm looking at them as a kid looking up. But
Yeah, well, I think we all do that, don't we? Yeah, but definitely Bloom comes across as older, whereas Stephen does come across as a pretentious early 20s.
Yeah,
intellectual, arrogant, and sure of himself, but also fragile.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, some of the characters are just terrific as well. I mean, who are your favourite characters?
My favorite.
One of my favourite characters is Paddy Dignam, and he's dead.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Favorite characters. I have a very warm spot in my heart for Leopold Bloom. I mean, he's the main guy. I always enjoyed when Buck Mulligan would come in because he would just come in and wreck everything.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely him. And I think like the characters that we've spent a lot of time with on the blog have an outsized position in the novel in my mind just because I spent a lot of time with them. So I actually have very like warm feelings for like everyone who's been in the first 4 or 5 chapters because I've just spent so much time. Even Mr. Deasy, I'm just like
I was going to say Mr. Deasy.
Even really? I'm just like he feels like a conservative uncle where like you're like, oh man, your worldview is disgusting, but you care about Stephen, but he's also an anti-Semite.
Yeah, exactly.
And he hates women too. Yeah. So.
Yeah, but the characters are rich, aren't they? And they are. I like the way that he it's not just Stephen, but he rediscovers or reintroduces characters that have been in his earlier books.
Yeah.
So the book, The Dubliners, short stories, the story The Boarding House, where the young man is kind of forced to marry the boarding house mistress's
Doran,
daughter,
I believe
Bob
his
Doran.
name. Yeah.
And and he just turns up in Ulysses
and he's
in Cyclops,
wrecked.
just a drunk.
Yeah.
He's just in the corner.
Very tragic.
When he hears Paddy Dignam's dead, he's just, blaming God. And it's just that in the years between getting married as a young man to whatever her name was,
being
the
forced into
daughter.
Marriage and
he's just ended up as a wasting his life. So, and that happens again and again. There are these characters either from Portrait or from Dubliners. A painful case that the lady who dies, who kills herself, Mrs.
Sinnott, I believe. Cynico.
Yeah. Isn't that it? Yeah. There's a reference to that in Ulysses. I just love the way that and that's the living city. It's the same city he's talking about. It's great.
Absolutely.
It's clever, I think.
Well, Phil, it has been amazing talking to you. I have really, really enjoyed getting to see all your editions of Ulysses and chat with you generally. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kelly, and thanks to Dermot as well.
Yes.
It's a great podcast, and I never feel that it's just that right balance of giving us learning, but also very entertaining and very interesting. It's not overly academic, but it's not too light either. So it's always a pleasure to listen to, and it's been an absolute pleasure for me to talk to you today.
Thank you so much from both myself and Dermot, who is responsible for the technical end of this today. All right.
Okay, Kelly.
Thank you.